The message glowed on my phone screen at 3 a.m., jolting me from a fitful sleep after a 16-hour shift in the OR. Emergency at Memorial Hospital. Complex cardiac case. Your expertise needed urgently. My heart raced as I recognized the area code, my hometown, the place I'd sworn never to return to. I'm Ava, and for the past decade, I've built my life around proving everyone wrong. Especially my brother Edward, whose voice still echoes in my head. Girls don't become surgeons, sis. Know your place. The harsh white light of my bedroom felt appropriate as I sat up, staring at the message. 10 years of silence from my family, broken by an urgent plea for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dawn was breaking over my hometown as the plane touched down, painting the sky in shades of revenge and redemption. In 3 hours, I'd walk into Memorial Hospital, face my past, and make a decision that would change everything. The question wasn't whether I could save Edward. The question was, after everything he'd done, would I want to? Memorial Hospital loomed before me, unchanged after all these years. The same concrete facade, the same sliding glass doors where Dad used to drop Mum off for her nursing shifts. Now I was walking through them as an attending surgeon. Ava! Giselle's voice cut through the sterile hospital air. She rushed toward me, scrubs swishing, her familiar face a welcome sight. After following me to medical school, she'd returned home to practice as an ER doctor. I can't believe you actually came. How bad is it? I asked, falling into step beside her. Bad enough that they called you? She handed me a tablet with Edward's charts. Ascending aortic dissection with complications, the kind of case that makes most surgeons nervous. I scrolled through the imaging studies, my trained eye catching details others might miss. Who's been managing him? Dr. Peterson, but he's out of his depth. When I saw the case, I knew you were Edward's best shot. Giselle paused outside the ICU doors. Your parents are in there. My hand froze on the door handle. Do they know? That their daughter is now a hotshot surgeon? No. Edward's been unconscious since admission, and your parents... She squeezed my arm. They still think you're working as a lab technician somewhere in Boston. I smoothed my white coat, fingering the embroidered Dr. Ava West, MD, above my pocket. Well, this should be interesting. The ICU's beeping monitors provided a steady backdrop as I pushed through the doors. Mom sat beside Edward's bed, looking older than I remembered. Dad stood by the window, his stern profile outlined against the morning light. Who are you? Mom's voice was sharp, protective. She didn't recognize me with my shorter hair and professional demeanor. I lifted my chin. I'm the surgeon who's going to save Edward's life. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Ava. She stood, swaying slightly. But you're not... a doctor? I finished for her, moving to check Edward's vitals. Surprise. Dad turned from the window. This is ridiculous. Where's Dr. Peterson? Dr. Peterson has requested a transfer of care, Giselle interjected smoothly. Dr. West is the most qualified surgeon for this procedure. No. Dad's voice carried the same authority it had when I was 16. I want a real surgeon. I met his gaze steadily. I am a real surgeon. Harvard Medical School, top of my class. Residency at Mass General. Fellowship at Cleveland Clinic. I've performed this exact procedure 17 times with 0 mortality. But please, tell me more about how I'm not qualified. The monitors beeped in the silence that followed. Why didn't you tell us? Mum whispered. Would you have believed me, supported me? I checked Edward's pupils. Or would you have torn up those acceptance letters too? A groan from the bed interrupted any response. Edward's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening as they landed on me. What are you doing here? His voice was weak but carried the same dismissive tone I remembered. Saving your life, apparently. I reviewed his latest labs. Unless you'd prefer to wait for another surgeon. Though I should warn you, time isn't on your side. You're not... He struggled to sit up. You can't be. A doctor? I smiled tightly. We've already covered that part. Now, you have a decision to make. Your aorta is dissecting. Without surgery in the next few hours, your chances of survival drop dramatically. I'm the best option you have. This is absurd, Dad started, but Giselle cut him off. With all due respect, sir, your son needs emergency surgery. Dr. West is the most qualified surgeon available. Those are the facts. Edward's monitor showed increasing heart rate. The pressure was building in his damaged aorta with every beat. Time to choose, brother. I held his gaze. Let me help you, or risk waiting for someone else who might not get here in time. You can't seriously be considering this, Giselle's voice crackled through my phone speaker minutes later. My best friend knew every scar my family had left. After everything they did, I took an oath, G. I paced my apartment, the city lights twinkling beyond my window. Besides, karma has a funny way of working things out. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. I watched the realization dawn in Edward's eyes. The same sister he'd belittled now held his life in her hands. Fine, he whispered finally. Do it. I nodded professionally, though my heart raced. I'll have the consent forms brought in. Surgery's scheduled for noon. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Edward, remember when you said girls don't become surgeons? I smiled. You might want to rethink that. As I walked out, Giselle fell into step beside me. That was intense. It's about to get more intense. I pulled up the surgical planning on my tablet. Page Dr. Gardner. I want him here for this. Already did. She grinned. He's on his way. The OR board showed my name next to Edward's surgery. In 4 hours, I'd have my brother's heart in my hands. Literally. The ultimate proof that dreams don't die, they just wait for the right moment to come true. The hospital's coffee was exactly as terrible as I remembered from my volunteer days. I sat in the doctor's lounge, reviewing Edward's imaging one more time, when a familiar voice filled the room. Still taking your coffee black, I see. Dr. Gardner stood in the doorway, his silver hair and confident stance unchanged after all these years. Old habits die hard. You came. I stood to hug my mentor, the man who'd believed in me when my own family wouldn't. Of course I came. Though I must say, the irony of this situation is... He gestured vaguely. Delicious, I offered, making him laugh. I was going to say remarkable, but yours works too. He sat across from me, studying Edward's scans. Talk me through your approach. Before I could answer, the door opened again. Mom stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. Ava, can we talk? Dr. Gardner squeezed my shoulder as he stood. I'll review the pre-op checklist. Find me when you're ready. Mom took his vacant seat, her hands fidgeting with her wedding ring. I found these in my old dresser this morning. She pulled out a stack of worn envelopes. Your letters, from medical school. You never opened them. It wasn't a question. The sealed envelopes told their own story. I was angry. You'd gone against everything we... She paused. Everything your father believed in. It was easier to pretend you'd failed. Than to admit you were wrong? A nurse poked her head in. Dr. West, patient's labs are back. I need to check these. I stood, but Mom grabbed my wrist. Wait, please. She pulled something else from her pocket, a newspaper clipping. I found this too. Young surgeon pioneers new cardiac procedure. Your name. Your picture. I didn't even recognize you. That was 2 years ago. I remembered the day clearly. My first major publication, the procedure that had put me on the map. Why didn't you tell us? Really? I pulled my hand away. Remember my high school graduation, when I announced I was applying to pre-med? The memory hung between us. Edward's mocking laughter, Dad's thunderous silence, Mom's quiet suggestion that nursing would be more appropriate. We were trying to protect you, she whispered. No, you were trying to control me. I checked my watch. I have surgery in an hour. Edward's surgery. The one none of your real surgeons will touch. The door opened again. Giselle entered with another stack of files. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the approach with the team. Of course. I turned back to Mom. You wanted to protect me from failure? Well, congratulations. I learned to succeed without any of you. As we walked to the OR floor, Giselle nudged me. You okay? Ask me after the surgery. I stopped at the nurses' station where Dr. Gardner was reviewing charts. What's the latest echo show? The dissection's extending. He pointed to the imaging. You'll need to work fast. Dr. West? A young resident approached, eyes bright with admiration. I read your paper on modified valve replacement techniques. Would it be possible to observe today's surgery? Before I could answer, Dad's voice boomed from behind us. You're not actually letting her operate, are you? Remember when Edward ripped up your med school applications? Giselle's tone hardened. Or when your mum said you'd make a better nurse because it's more suitable for a woman? The memory stung fresh. I'd been 17, sitting at our kitchen table, acceptance letter clutched in my trembling hands. Edward had laughed, torn it to pieces, and Mom had simply watched. Dr. Gardner straightened to his full height. Mr. West, I presume. I'm Dr. Gardner, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Mass General. Your daughter trained under me for 7 years. She's performed this procedure more successfully than any surgeon in the Northeast. She's still my daughter, and I forbid. With all due respect, sir, Dr. Gardner's voice turned icy. You have no authority here. This is a hospital, not your living room. Dr. West isn't asking for your permission. She's saving your son's life. The resident looked between us, wide-eyed. I turned to her. Scrub in, or 3. You can assist. Dad's face reddened. Ava, that's Dr. West in this hospital. I met his gaze steadily. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for surgery. In the scrub room, I let the familiar ritual of surgical preparation calm my nerves. The soap's antiseptic smell, the methodical cleaning of each finger, each nail. Remember what I taught you, Dr. Gardner said, scrubbing beside me. In the OR, nothing exists except you and the patient. No past, no drama, just the work. I nodded, watching the water run over my hands. In 30 minutes, I'd be standing over my brother's open chest, holding his life in these same hands. The hands, he said, would never be skilled enough for surgery. Time to prove them all wrong, Giselle said softly, helping me with my surgical gown. The OR doors swung open, welcoming me into the domain where I truly belonged, where I wasn't someone's daughter or sister, but simply a surgeon, the best damn surgeon for this case. Scalpel, I called out, and the metal slapped into my palm with familiar precision. It was time to work. BP's dropping. The anesthesiologist's voice cut through the focused silence of all 3. 90/60. Push another unit, I commanded, my hand steady inside Edward's chest cavity. The ascending aorta was worse than the imaging had suggested, the dissection extending further than we'd anticipated. He's not maintaining pressure, Dr. Gardner observed from across the table. What's your move? The resident watched intently as I assessed the situation. This was the moment that separated good surgeons from great ones, the ability to make critical decisions under pressure. Cross-clamp, I called out. The instrument slapped into my palm. We're going to have to do this differently. Different how? The resident's voice wavered slightly. Watch and learn. I positioned the clamp with practiced precision. The technique I published last year. We're about to demonstrate it live. The OR doors swung open. Giselle entered, already scrubbed. His labs are critical. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Pressure's still dropping, the anesthesiologist warned. 85/50. My brother's blood coated my gloves as I worked, each movement deliberate and precise. The same hands he'd said were too delicate for surgery were now methodically reconstructing his torn aorta. Beautiful technique, Dr. Gardner murmured. Textbook perfect. BP 70/40, the monitors screamed in protest. Come on, Edward, I muttered, my fingers flying as I placed the crucial suture. Don't you dare quit now. The resident gasped as blood suddenly flooded the field. We're losing him. No, we're not. My voice remained steady. Suction. More light. And someone tell my parents their son is not dying on my table today. Dr. Gardner's eyes crinkled above his surgical mask, a smile. Show them why you're the best, Ava. The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of technical precision and split-second decisions. Every skill I'd learned, every procedure I'd perfected, every doubt I'd overcome, it all led to this moment. BP stabilizing, the anesthesiologist announced. 90/60, now 100/70. Well done, Dr. West. Dr. Gardner's praise carried the weight of years of mentorship. Textbook repair with your modification. This case is going in the teaching file. Dr. Gardner wouldn't have trained you for nothing, Giselle continued. You're one of the best cardiothoracic surgeons on the East Coast now. They don't deserve your help. I grabbed my coffee, the familiar bitter taste grounding me. Maybe that's exactly why I need to go, to show them exactly who they underestimated. My phone buzzed again, another message from Memorial. Patient critical, decision needed within hour. What would you do? I asked Giselle, though I already knew my answer. I stepped back, surveying my work. Edward's heart beat strongly, the repaired aorta holding perfectly. Close for me, I told the resident. I need to update the family. In the scrub room, I peeled off my bloody gloves and surgical gown. Giselle appeared with a protein bar and water bottle. Eat, she ordered. You've been in there for 6 hours. His heart's beating, I said quietly. Despite everything, I couldn't let him die. Because you're a doctor first and his sister second. She squeezed my shoulder. Ready to face them? The surgical waiting room fell silent as I entered. Mom stood immediately, Dad's hand gripping her arm, the same position they'd taken when I'd announced my medical school acceptance. Only this time, they couldn't dismiss me. The surgery was successful, I announced, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just performed a near miracle. The aortic dissection has been repaired using a modified technique I developed. Edward's stable and should make a full recovery. Mum's legs gave out. Dad caught her as she collapsed into a chair. Thank God, she whispered. No, Dad said quietly. Thank Ava. I blinked, surprised by his words. Before I could respond, Dr. Gardner joined us. I've worked with hundreds of surgeons, he addressed my parents. Your daughter is among the finest I've ever seen. What she just accomplished in that operating room. He shook his head in admiration. Well, let's just say there's a reason we called her specifically for this case. When can we see him? Mom asked. He'll be in recovery for several hours, I explained, slipping back into professional mode. Once he's stable in ICU, you can visit briefly. Dr. Gardner will oversee his immediate post-op care while You're leaving? Dad's question carried an unfamiliar note. Was it concern? I have patients waiting for me in Boston. I checked my phone. My flight's in 3 hours. Ava, Mum started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. Dr. West, a nurse called from the doorway. Edward's asking for you. I hesitated, looking at Giselle, who nodded encouragingly. Go, she said softly. Complete the circle. Walking toward recovery, I steeled myself for what was coming. Edward would be groggy, vulnerable, possibly not even remember our earlier interaction, but he'd be alive, and he'd know exactly who had saved him. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming exactly who they said you couldn't be. The recovery room was dimly lit, machines beeping steadily as I approached Edward's bed. His eyes were half open, struggling to focus through the post-anesthetic haze. Hey there, big brother, I said softly, checking his vitals. How's that heart of yours feeling? Ava? His voice was raspy. You actually did it? Did you doubt me? I adjusted his IV drip. Actually, don't answer that. I always... He coughed and I helped him sip some water. I always thought you'd fail. I know. I recorded his numbers on the chart. That was kind of the point, wasn't it? The door opened and Dr. Gardner entered with Giselle. Our patient's awake. How are you feeling, Edward? Like someone cracked open my chest. Edward's attempt at humor fell flat. That would be your sister's handiwork. Dr. Gardner pulled up the post-op imaging on his tablet. Want to see what she did? It's quite remarkable. Edward's eyes widened as Dr. Gardner showed him the before and after images. The dissection was extensive, my mentor explained. Most surgeons wouldn't have attempted this repair. Your sister used a technique she developed. It's being taught in medical schools now. You invented a surgical procedure? Edward looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Several, actually, Giselle chimed in. She's kind of a big deal in cardiac surgery, but you'd know that if you'd bothered to read any of her letters. A nurse poked her head in. Dr. West, your parents are asking to see the patient. Send them in, I said, then turned to Edward. Think you're up for more visitors? I'd let them rot, she replied instantly. But you won't, will you? Because you're better than them. I smiled despite myself. I'll call you when I land. The next hour passed in a blur. Packed bag, emergency credentials transferred, first flight booked. As I rushed through the empty airport terminal, memories flooded back. Dad's dismissive grunt when I announced my MCAT scores, Mom's pointed comments about finding a husband instead of a career, Edward's constant belittling. He grabbed my wrist before I could step away. Wait, I need to say something. Save your strength. I was wrong. His grip tightened. About everything. I was wrong, and I was... He swallowed hard. I was jealous. The monitor showed his heart rate increasing. Edward, you need to stay calm. No, let me finish. His voice strengthened. You were always smarter than me, always worked harder. I couldn't stand it, so I tried to tear you down instead of... The door opened as Mom and Dad entered, freezing at Edward's words. Instead of what? I asked quietly. Instead of being proud of my little sister. His eyes filled with tears. God, Ava, you became everything you said you would, while I just became... A patient who needs rest, Dr. Gardner interrupted firmly. This conversation can wait until you're stronger. Mom rushed to Edward's bedside while Dad hung back, looking uncomfortable. I moved to leave, but Dr. Gardner caught my arm. Your flight's been cancelled, he said. Weather in Boston. I've arranged a room for you at the hospital. I can't stay. You have to, Giselle cut in. Post-op monitoring for the next 24 hours. You know the protocol for your modified technique better than anyone. I glanced at my family. Mom fussing over Edward, Dad staring at the surgical images on the wall monitor, my brother looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Fine, I conceded. But I need coffee. Real coffee, not that break room sludge. Already handled. Giselle produced a cup from my favorite local cafe. Some things never change. Later that night, I sat in my temporary office, reviewing patient files when Dad appeared in the doorway. Your mother went home to rest, he said awkwardly. I wanted to see your publications. I handed him a folder. Here, all 23 of them. He flipped through the papers, his expression unreadable. These medical terms, I don't understand most of them. That's okay. The important part is that they're saving lives. I took a sip of fresh coffee. Like Edward's. I was wrong too, he said suddenly, still staring at the papers. When I said medicine wasn't for women, when I tried to stop you, I was wrong and He cleared his throat. I'm sorry, Ava. The words hung in the air between us, 29 years in the making. You know what the hardest part was? I set down my coffee. Not the long hours, not the studying, not even the surgeries. It was knowing my own family believed I would fail. And instead, you excelled. He placed the folder carefully on my desk. You proved us all wrong, proved me wrong. My phone buzzed, a message from the ICU. Edward's latest labs. I have to check on my patient, I said, standing. You mean your brother? Tonight, he's my patient first. I headed for the door, then paused. But Dad, thanks for finally seeing me. As I walked toward the ICU, Giselle fell into step beside me. You okay? Ask me tomorrow. I smiled slightly. After all the lab results are in. She laughed, understanding I wasn't just talking about Edward's tests. Some results take longer to process than others, especially when they're measuring the distance between who we were and who we've become. Dawn crept through the ICU windows as I reviewed Edward's overnight charts. His recovery was progressing well, almost too well. The kind of case other surgeons would whisper about in conference rooms. "Your brother's becoming quite the celebrity," Dr. Gardner said, joining me at the nurse's station. 3 doctors have already requested to transfer their patients to you. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I reminded him, signing off on medication orders. "Are you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Memorial's offering you chief of cardiothoracic surgery, full department, complete autonomy. Name your salary." I nearly dropped my pen. "What?" "They'd be idiots not to. Your procedure yesterday, that's going to bring patients from across the country." He handed me an official-looking envelope. "Just think about it." Before I could respond, alarms blared from Edward's room. We rushed in to find him struggling to sit up, monitors screaming. "Edward, stop moving." I pressed him back against the pillows. "You'll tear your sutures." "Had to tell you something." His voice was strained. "The acceptance letter, the one I tore up. That was 12 years ago. I kept the pieces." He grabbed my hand. "In my desk drawer, all these years, because I knew you'd prove me wrong someday." The monitors slowly stabilized as he relaxed back into the bed. Mom appeared in the doorway, looking panicked. "Last call for flight 2187 to Cincinnati." The announcement echoed through the terminal as I sprinted to my gate. Dr. Gardner's words from my residency came back to me. "Sometimes the greatest revenge is excellence itself." He'd become more of a father figure than my own dad ever was, believing in me when no one else would. My phone buzzed one final time before takeoff. A text from an unknown number. "Please hurry, it's Edward." "Everything's fine," I assured her. "He just tried to do too much too soon." Typical Edward. Always had to be the center of attention. She attempted a weak smile. "Even as children." "Yeah, well, some things never change." I adjusted Edward's IV. "Though some things do." "Dr. West," a young nurse interrupted. "There's a situation in the conference room. The board wants to speak with you." I glanced at Dr. Gardner, who nodded encouragingly. "Go, I'll watch him." The conference room was packed with hospital administrators and board members. They stood as I entered, like I was some kind of visiting dignitary, instead of the girl who used to volunteer in their gift shop. "Dr. West," the hospital president began, "we've reviewed your work here, as well as your research history. We'd like to formally offer you the position of Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery." "I have a life in Boston," I said carefully. "Patients, research, commitments, all of which could be transferred here." He slid a contract across the table. "We're prepared to fund your research fully, build you a state-of-the-art lab, whatever you need." "Why me?" I met his gaze directly. "Why now?" "Because you're the best." He gestured to a stack of medical journals. "Your publications speak for themselves. And yesterday's surgery. That's the kind of innovation we need here." Giselle burst into the room, interrupting the negotiations. "Sorry, but Edward's asking for you. Says it's important." Back in the ICU, I found my entire family gathered around Edward's bed. Dad was holding an old, battered shoebox. "What's this?" I asked. Edward nodded at Dad, who opened the box. Inside were hundreds of newspaper clippings, printouts of medical journal abstracts, and conference announcements, all featuring my name. "Mom found them in Edward's study," Dad explained. "He's been tracking your career since you left." I picked up a faded article about my first successful surgery. "You kept these?" "All of them." Edward's voice was stronger now. "Every achievement, every breakthrough. I was too proud to tell you, but—" He coughed slightly. "I never missed one." "The hospital offered me a position," I said suddenly. "Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery." "Take it," Edward said immediately. "Show everyone else what I was too stupid to see." "Your brother's right," Dad added, surprising everyone. This is where you belong, where you've always belonged. Dr. Gardner appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt this family moment, but Dr. West, there's a patient in the ER, complex cardiac case. They're asking for you specifically. I looked around the room, at my mentor's encouraging smile, Giselle's knowing nod, Mom's hopeful expression, Dad's newfound respect, and Edward's genuine support. Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd proven, had led to this moment. Tell them I'll be right there, I said, reaching for my white coat, and get me the paperwork for that job offer. Already done, Giselle grinned, producing the contract. As I signed my name, accepting the position that would bring me full circle, Edward spoke up again. Hey, sis. His voice carried none of its old mockery. Thanks for not giving up. On your dreams, or on me. I paused at the door, looking back at my family, finally seeing me for who I'd become, not who they'd tried to make me be. Some dreams are worth fighting for, I said simply, then headed toward my next surgery, my next challenge, my next chance to prove that sometimes coming home means building a new one entirely. 3 weeks into my new role at Memorial, I stood in OR3 again, but this time Edward sat observing from the gallery above. His recovery had been remarkable, and he'd insisted on watching my first major surgery as chief. The plane lifted off into the dark sky, carrying me back to everything I'd fought so hard to escape. But this time, I wasn't returning as the little girl they'd tried to break. I was returning as Dr. Ava West, attending surgeon with the power to save the very brother who'd tried to crush my dreams. Can I get you anything? The flight attendant's voice pulled me from my thoughts. No, thank you. I smiled, fingers tracing the surgical schedule Memorial had sent. The procedure would be complex, a type few surgeons could handle. The kind of surgery that had earned me my reputation. My phone held one last message from Giselle. Remember who you are now. Don't let them make you small again. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Edward had insisted I'd never amount to anything in medicine. Now his life might depend on the very skills he'd mocked. I closed my eyes, remembering the day I'd secretly reapplied to med school, determined to prove him wrong. We're beginning our descent into Cincinnati, the pilot announced. Local time is 5:47 a.m. Scalpel, I called out, beginning a complex valve replacement. The gallery was packed with residents and medical students, all eager to learn my technique. Dr. West makes it look easy, I heard one student whisper. Like she's just following a recipe. Trust me, Edward's voice carried from above. Nothing about her journey was easy. I smiled behind my surgical mask, focusing on the intricate procedure before me. The patient was young, just 19, with a congenital heart defect similar to one I'd repaired in Boston. BP dropping, the anesthesiologist announced. That's expected, I responded calmly. Watch this next part carefully, I addressed the gallery. This is where conventional techniques usually fail. My hands moved with practiced precision, implementing the modification I'd developed. The OR fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft clink of instruments. Pressure stabilizing, the anesthesiologist confirmed. Impressive, Dr. West. And that, Dr. Gardner's voice came from the gallery, is why she's chief. 2 hours later, I walked out of the OR to find Mum waiting with coffee. Perfect timing, I said, accepting the cup. How's the patient's family? Nervous, but I told them about Edward. She smiled. Nothing reassures parents like hearing about your track record. Speaking of records, Giselle approached with a tablet. Your paper on yesterday's procedure just got accepted. Fast-track publication. Another one for Edward's collection, Mom teased. Actually, Edward appeared, walking slowly but steadily. I'm thinking of going digital. My shoebox is getting full. You should be resting, I scolded, but couldn't hide my smile. And miss my sister making history? Not a chance. He leaned against the wall. Besides, Dad's giving a tour to potential donors, showing off his daughter's department. The word still felt surreal. Dad had become my biggest advocate, proudly introducing me as my daughter, the chief surgeon, to anyone who would listen. Dr. West, a young female resident, approached nervously. I was wondering if I could discuss my fellowship application with you. Of course, I checked my watch. Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. After she left, Edward chuckled. Remember when that was you, terrified to even mention medical school? Difference is, Giselle interjected, Ava didn't have someone like herself to look up to. No, I agreed, watching the resident walk away. But she will. The afternoon brought a stream of consultations, each case more challenging than the last. Word had spread about Memorial's new chief of cardiothoracic surgery, and patients were being transferred from across the country. Your 3 o'clock is here, my assistant announced, and Dr. Gardner wants to discuss the new research protocol. I looked up to find Dad standing in my office doorway, pride evident in his expression. Remember when you said this wasn't a suitable career for women? I asked, signing off on charts. I remember being an old fool. He sat down heavily. I also remember the day you proved me wrong. In that OR, saving your brother's life. Speaking of the OR, I stood, gathering my files. I have another surgery to prepare for. Another life to save, he corrected. Another family to help. In the scrub room, I went through my familiar routine, but this time something was different. The weight of proving myself was gone, replaced by the simple satisfaction of doing what I was meant to do. Ready to show them how it's done? Giselle asked, scrubbing in beside me. Always. I smiled, remembering all the times we'd dreamed of this moment during medical school. The OR doors swung open, and I entered to find my entire team waiting. Above in the gallery, Edward sat with our parents, Dr. Gardner beside them. The room was filled with the next generation of surgeons, all watching, learning, believing that their dreams were possible too. Scalpel, I called out, and as the instrument settled into my palm, I caught Edward's eye in the gallery. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come from torn acceptance letters and crushed dreams, of how redemption sometimes comes not through revenge, but through excellence. Beginning initial incision, I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the OR. Pay attention, everyone. This is how we save lives. And as I made the first cut, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right. One surgery, one life, one dream at a time. The autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee as I sat with Edward on the hospital's rooftop garden. His surgical scar had healed nicely, barely visible above his collar. Remember when we used to sneak up here as kids? He sipped his coffee, while Mum was working her nursing shifts. You mean when you used to tease me about playing doctor with my stuffed animals? I smiled. Look how that turned out. About that, he pulled an old wrinkled envelope from his jacket. The pieces had been carefully taped together. I think it's time I returned this. My hands trembled as I recognized my original medical school acceptance letter. You really did keep it. As a reminder of my biggest mistake. He watched as I traced the torn edges, but also of your greatest triumph. The door opened, and Giselle emerged with Dr. Gardner. Emergency department needs a consult, Chief. Duty calls. I stood, but Edward caught my arm. Wait, there's something else. He handed me a thick manila envelope. Open it. Inside was a grant proposal. The Edward West Foundation for Women in Medicine. What is this? My way of making things right. He struggled to find the words. Using my business connections to fund scholarships for girls like you who deserve a chance to prove everyone wrong. Dr. Gardner cleared his throat. The board's already approved it. Full funding for 10 medical students per year. And guess who gets to choose the recipients? Giselle grinned. The door burst open again. One of my residents rushed out, breathless. Dr. West, multiple trauma coming in, car accident. They need you in the OR. Go, Edward said softly. Do what you were always meant to do. In the OR, I faced not one, but 3 critical cases. As I moved between operating rooms, directing teams, implementing procedures I'd developed, I caught glimpses of my family in the gallery. Mom passing out coffee, Dad explaining procedures to wide-eyed medical students, Edward taking notes for his foundation's first round of scholarships. BP dropping in, OR2, a nurse called out. On my way. I moved swiftly, my mind clear, my hand steady. This was who I'd become, not just a surgeon, but a leader, a teacher, a bridge between what was and what could be. Hours later, as I finished the last suture, applause erupted from the gallery. Not just from my family, but from dozens of young residents and students, many of them women, all of them seeing their own possibilities in my success. In the scrub room, I found a surprise visitor, the same nurse who'd doubted me during Edward's surgery. I was wrong about you, she said simply. We all were. You've changed this hospital, changed how we see things. We all change, I replied, thinking of Edward's foundation, of Dad's pride, of Mom's coffee runs. We just need the chance to prove it. The day ended where it began, on the rooftop, but this time, with my entire family, Giselle, and Dr. Gardner. The setting sun painted the hospital windows gold. First round of scholarship applications came in, Edward announced, holding up his tablet. Over 300 candidates. All dreaming of becoming the next Dr. West, Dad added. No, I corrected him, of becoming themselves. That's the point, isn't it? We don't need to become each other. We just need to become who we're meant to be. Speaking of becoming, Dr. Gardner handed me an envelope. The American College of Surgeons wants you to deliver the keynote at next month's conference. Topic, Breaking Barriers in Modern Medicine. Tell them yes, Edward said before I could respond. Tell them my sister's story. Our story, I corrected him. About how sometimes the hardest hearts to heal are the ones closest to us. Mum wiped tears from her eyes. I wish I'd seen it sooner. Your strength, your determination. You see it now. I squeezed her hand. That's what matters. The emergency helicopter landed on the pad below, its rotors whipping the evening air. Another case. Another chance to prove that dreams don't die. They evolve, they grow, they heal. Ready for another surgery, Chief? Giselle asked. I looked at my family. No longer obstacles, but allies. No longer critics, but champions. At Edward, whose foundation would open doors for countless others. At the hospital, where I'd once been told I didn't belong, now my domain. Always ready, I said, heading for the door. Because that's what doctors do. We heal, we teach, we change. One heart at a time. Behind me, Edward's voice carried on the wind. Go show them how it's done, sis. Like you always have. And I did, walking toward my next challenge, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was meant to be. Not despite my family's doubts, but because of how we'd all grown beyond them.